Layer 2, the Eternal Gale. This treacherous landscape makes even the most seasoned of adventurers quake in their boots. Whether it be the man-eating parasites that disguise themselves as snow all around, gusts of wind backed by a force easily capable of blowing a full-grown man straight off their feet and into the depths below, or the unspeakable and horrifying monsters that will stop at nothing to tear the flesh from your bones. The Eternal Gale is where I chose to make my final stand. Do or die, I simply wouldn't be able to live with myself if I'm not able to traverse the depths and come out alive. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. The first step is entering the Eternal Gale to begin with. The beginning of our journey starts with us jumping into a whirlpool. This whirlpool will be our one-way ticket into Layer 1 of the depths. An almost equally as dangerous place, but in order to get to Layer 2, we've got to traverse Layer 1. After waking up in the outskirts of the sunken city, I made my way to the diver's final holdout, Castle Light. This is the only place in Layer 1 of the depths that holds even a modicum of safety. Heading the divers here in Castle Light is Claris, the person that we need to talk to in order to make our journey into Layer 2 slightly less treacherous. You see, Claris is looking for a rescue team of sorts. She's sent down a group of highly skilled divers, including one of the most veteran of divers, Chaser. And despite that, she hasn't heard anything back from them. With manpower being extremely scarce at the moment, she's looking for anyone that will help her out in order to find out what happened to Chaser and the rest of the divers. And in exchange for that, she'll offer the assistance of the Light Hook. This Light Hook will give us the opportunity to extract from Layer 2 at any given moment for 20 minutes. But once those 20 minutes are up, we're stranded. So in other words, it's a race against time. I took her offer, stepped onto the portal, and descended into Layer 2. The first step of my journey required me to get a key in order to open a door. Pretty light work, I grabbed the key, and the door is open. Past the door is a series of thin bridges with high winds that can easily blow you off if you're not careful. See, our goal right now is to turn on a generator, because without it, we won't be able to progress later. Unfortunately, this generator is guarded by my nemesis, the Bone Keeper. In a previous life, this guy has been my worst nightmare. But now, things have changed. The Bone Keeper kicked off the fight by directly throwing a bone straight into me. It caught me off guard, and I wasn't able to parry. He followed it up with his charge attack, something that's done me in several times in the past, but this time I was able to dodge it without issue. Once I managed to close the distance on the Bone Keeper, I continued to parry and attack when I had the opportunity. And with my newly developed skills, I was able to take down the Bone Keeper with minimal effort. Climbing further up the spire, I activated the generator and headed back down. Backtracking through the windy passages, I made my way to a lantern. These lanterns are lifesavers, as they're the only way to get rid of the parasites that build up on your skin the longer you spend in the Eternal Gale. Moving forward, and I found 2 divers. But unfortunately, these divers were much too far gone. I had no other choice but to put them out of their misery. Pressing forward, I met 3 more divers that met the same fate as the previous 2. It was at this point that I made a glaring error. While trying to figure out where I needed to go next, I lost my footing, and the wind blew me off the edge. Fortunately, it wasn't a fatal fall, but it left me completely clueless as to where I was in the Eternal Gale, surrounded by the dense fog. Not only that, but I got ambushed. This enemy is called a Bounder, and I've never fought one before. I was strictly unprepared to fight it, but was able to finish it off nonetheless. The Bounder was the least of my problems, as being lost in the Eternal Gale is as good as a death sentence. I had a general idea of where I needed to go based on the Union hooks in the area, but even despite that, I was completely lost. Running into another Bounder, and I was not nearly as lucky as the previous encounter. Trying to take the thing on proved to be ineffective at best, and I barely scraped by the skin of my teeth. It was at this point that panic began to set in. If I couldn't find a way up or figure out where I was supposed to go, the parasites would get me. And as I continued to aimlessly flail around in the fog and try to fight off the enemies around me, eventually, that was simply an unavoidable fate. The beginning of Expedition 2 remained extremely similar to Expedition 1. I still had to turn on the generator, which meant dispatching of the Bone Keeper and braving the winds. When I found my way back to the 3 enemies that I'd fought previously, this time they weren't there. It was a goddamn ambush. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, the wind or the enemies that were trying to take me out. And at the end of the day, the wind knocked me off once again. A familiar predicament, this time with even less direction on where I was going. After wandering the wastes for a considerable amount of time, I eventually decided that it would be better to cut my losses. I activated the light hook and descended back to Layer 1. Expedition 3 saw me finally going the right way. This time around, I used better landmarks to my advantage and was able to traverse the fog without issue, making my way into the Furfire Caverns. Just because this place isn't subject to the wind doesn't mean that it isn't a dangerous hellhole. The Furfire Caverns are a labyrinth of hallways filled to the brim with enemies, along with several patches of loose hanging spikes that'll fall off of the ceiling and impale you if you're not careful. After far too many wrong turns and several encounters with the monsters of Furfire Caverns, when I finally managed to make my way out, we had an issue. I was very, very close to obtaining Etheron's gaze from one of the Kiersons dwelling in Furfire. But when I weighed my options, I decided it would be better to activate the light hook and come back in order to try to have more time on the next run. Expedition 4 was a perfect showcasing of why you use the light hook. If you lose your footing in Layer 2 and fall into the void, well, no death is more certain. Expedition 5 would be the time I would finally see a breakthrough. Learning from my previous failures, I was able to blaze through the early areas of the Eternal Gale and finally acquire Etheron's gaze. This ability would pierce the fog and allow me to see significantly further than I could before. With barely any time left on my light hook, I decided, well, I might as well attempt a cheese. And unsurprisingly, that cheese did not pan out. It was at this point that I was extremely fatigued by my continuous expeditions into Layer 2 and decided to take a break and come back at it after some rest. Rejuvenated, I returned to Layer 2 on day 2. Feeling determined to make this the run, I once again stat-checked the Bone Keeper, activated the generator, traversed the windy passages, made my way through the caverns, and with plenty of time to spare, finally was ready to move on. Our next trial was to make our way through the Nest Corridor. You remember those bounders from earlier? Well, now, there's a lot of them. Fighting was not an option. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, and eventually climbed up a cliff face where the bounders couldn't follow me. Past the cliffs lay a myriad of towers, with very thin pillars connecting them. Thankfully, this area is not affected by the Eternal Gale's gusts of wind, so I was not at risk of being blown off the pillars. I was, however, absolutely still at risk of getting knocked off by the enemies, something that I got extremely lucky with right here. I continued to explore the towers, including killing another Bone Keeper. Past the Bone Keeper, I climbed the final ascent up to the Cathedral of Etheron. As I entered the cathedral, there he was, Chaser. Surrounding Chaser were several vials of blood, along with the corpses of the divers that he came down with. Clearly, something was wrong. Speaking to Chaser, and he claimed that his squad had mutinied, which would explain their deaths. He also explained that he was searching for the city. He explained that the tower that we were in sits atop New Kyrsa, the sleeping city. Not only that, but down there lies the bedchambers of the drowned god Etheron. Then, my naivete got the better of me once again. First the Lord Regent, now Chaser. Well, at the very least this time, I'm gonna make him pay for it. Chaser laughed maniacally and rose into the air surrounded by a torrent of blood. It was clear that he was gathering blood from the surrounding vials in order to power himself. So in an attempt to drain his power, I ran around the room destroying the bottles of blood. While in the process of doing this, Chaser consistently launched several attacks that I was having considerable difficulty dealing with. He was using his blood magic in order to fire spikes of blood that would deal considerable damage, along with an attack that would grab me and slam me straight into the floor. Not only that, but he would also use area denial in the form of huge waves of blood that would traverse the floor and deal considerable damage if I didn't jump over them. After destroying enough of the blood vials, I managed to knock Chaser down and have an opportunity to attack. This was limited, however, especially with my late reaction to the draw. I did minimal damage, and Chaser regained his strength. I repeated the process of destroying the blood vials, and on the second time, was ready to deal some more damage. As the fight dragged on, I repeated my actions time and time again. But unfortunately, it was at this point that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to keep up. My health was draining, and fast. Not only that, but my connection to Claris through the light hook was quickly running out. If my light hook ran out and I was defeated by Chaser, it was over. This panicked state certainly did not help when it came to dodging Chaser's attacks, and because of it, I continued to take more and more damage. It was at this point that I screwed up for the final time. It should have been over right then and there, but I could feel something call to me, something from the world beyond. My soul resonated with the very song in the airs around us, and by nothing short of a miracle, I was brought back to life at full strength. Making use of my second wind, I continued to deal damage to Chaser until eventually he was so fatigued that he appeared to be giving up. But clearly he had decided that if he was going to die, he was taking me with him. In one final suicidal act, Chaser dealt a hefty half of my health bar, but in the end, the strain on his body was simply too much, and he perished. At this point, I was left with a choice. I could step into the light hook created by Claris and ascend back up to Layer 1, or I could descend deeper into the depths of Layer 2 towards the lost city of Kyrsa. Weighing my options, I made the difficult choice. What kind of adventurer would I be if I didn't have the opportunity that so few had before me? I decided to continue my story by descending deeper. Here's the thing about adventuring stories, though, my friends. Not all of them have happy endings. Enter the story of Maxwell Rico. His father, Wax Rico, had descended into the depths of Layer 2 and never returned. In hopes of finishing the mission that his father could not, Maxwell trained and followed in his father's footsteps. This is now his story. Making use of the knowledge of those who came before him, Maxwell was easily able to triumph over the trials of the Eternal Gale. Even Bone Keepers, something that stood as an immense roadblock to our previous heroes' journeys, were now nothing more than a footnote. Not only that, but when Maxwell scaled the Cathedral of Etheron and had to face off against Chaser, this fight went substantially better for him than it ever had for his father, making relatively short work of Chaser, and now the son stands at the same crossroads that his forebears faced before him. And unsurprisingly, the choice remained clear. New Kyrsa is a strange, alien place. It shares absolutely zero resemblance to the eternal Gale that guards it. But despite its relatively tranquil appearance, New Kyrsa is an equally, if not even more dangerous place than the eternal Gale. Navigating the cliffside, and we make our way into our first hurdle, the library. The library is host to a complex puzzle. However, in this case, the puzzle was bypassed by something of divine clairvoyance. After completing the library puzzle and activating yet another obelisk, we were continuing to make progress. Finally, we would truly enter the city of New Kyrsa. Our hero would scale to the heights above, heading up into a tower and taking a teleporter, which would end at another obelisk. 3 down, 2 to go. After exiting the tower through another portal, we're heading down into the sunken railways. This is a sinister place, with little to no light being found here. The next obelisk was activated, but not without consequence. The denizens of the sunken railway were none too happy with my actions. Coming out of the ground, it was another ambush. Rather than standing to fight, I fled through a hole in the wall and climbed my way back up to the city surface. The city surface, however, was arguably more dangerous than where I had come from. Another ambush. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me out of there. Eventually, it was me up against the wall, so I had to fight. After carefully dodging his attacks, I managed to bring down one of the denizens of the city. I made my way to the rooftops in order to survey the landscape. Eventually, it was time to head to the fifth and final obelisk. But before I could get there, the Shrine of Arrival? What had happened? It's almost as if I had never moved from the start. Pressing forward, it seemed like time was of the essence. I could feel in my bones that if I wasn't able to activate this fifth obelisk soon, my days would surely be numbered. I once again navigated the library, traversed the city, and eventually made my way to the fifth and final obelisk. It appeared to be surrounded by humanoids? When I approached to speak with the men, I was attacked without question. The divers exclaimed, "Help us," but despite those words, continued to attack. There was only one thing that I could do for these people now. It was me or them. After activating the final obelisk, the very ground around the city began to shake. And when the shaking stopped, an ominous sound could be heard. I knew in my heart that the final trial that awaited me lied at the origin of that very sound. Ascending a staircase, and a very ominous purple and black swirl could be found. The origin of the noise that I had heard. I could feel the force tearing at my very being, but despite that, I resisted. I could feel the pain and horror of the citizens of this city before it was engulfed into the chaos that it remains in to this very day. It weighed heavily on the soul, but again, I resisted. And finally, the vortex dissipated, leaving nothing but silence. And then, wake. The Scion of Etheron emerged, and with it, a danger without measure. The Scion kicked off the fight by charging an enormous ball of energy. I barely managed to dodge the orb, however, I still took sizable damage. They followed that attack with a concentrated beam of purple energy. It appeared to be a front though, because right after the beam, I was blinded. The Scion pressed this advantage by summoning several bones under my feet, along with firing bones directly at me. I was struggling heavily. Things were not looking good. Foolishly, I carried one of the bones that the Scion had dropped and was planning on placing it into some of these pillars, as that appeared to be the way to take him down. What I didn't realize at the time was that while holding the bone, it would encumber me far too much to be able to dash. And because of that, the next massive blast of energy was very, very nearly fatal, with the only reason that I was able to survive being the helmet on my head. A helmet that I had only acquired due to the kindness of a stranger that I would likely never know the name of. However, even with this second shot at life, some things simply are inevitable. Clinging to nothing but a thread of life, I regained consciousness. It's never over until it's truly over. Pressing forward, I managed to take down one of the Kyrson guards, which finally would grant me some respite. Absorbing its strength, I was healthier and finally felt like I stood a chance. Grabbing one of the bones that the Scion had thrown at me, I placed it into the final pillar, which activated the stairs heading up to the second floor. On the second floor, the Scion tried to get one over on me by shooting a laser at me at the same time as summoning bones under my feet. But at this point, I started to see through its tricks and managed to dodge both attacks with minimal effort. I circled the floor, gathering bones, placing them in pillars, and opened our way up to floor number 3. At this point, the Scion was clearly becoming impatient and tried to attack me directly. I parried the attack and finally was able to deal some damage back. After successfully placing a bone in the final pillar on the 3rd floor, several tendrils reached out and stunned the Scion, giving me an opportunity to attack. And take that opportunity, I did. I wailed on him with everything I had. But alas, he recovered and began to once again press the attack. This time around, I only had to place one bone into each of the pillars. So, with my wits about me, that's exactly what I did. Making short work of the Kiersons guarding the pillars, I placed bones into all 3 of them and once again stunned the Scion. Ascending back to the 2nd floor, I attacked with everything I had. And this time around, it was enough. The Scion once again descended into the void from whence it came. But celebrations could not be in order quite yet. I heard the voice of Claris. It seemed that the Scion was the only thing that was holding the Eternal Gale as a whole together. And after defeating him, the entire realm was falling apart. I had to get out of there, and fast. There wasn't a moment to spare. I ran with absolutely everything I had. I could feel it in my bones. Only a minute left. Despite the realm quite literally falling apart in front of them, the Scion's goons were more than content with going down to the ship if it meant taking me with them. I paid them little mind, blazed past them as fast as I could, and finally reached the light hook, ascending from layer 2, victorious. Got him for you, Dad.